In the very heart of the galaxy, the Celestial Council had gathered the most advanced and influential civilizations for an urgent assembly. This council existed to preserve balance in a universe overflowing with life, a stage where each species had carved its dominance over millennia, through intellect, through alliances, or through sheer technological might. They prided themselves on their refinement, often regarding younger races as little more than primitive curiosities, irrelevant in the grand order of galactic affairs. But this time, the discussion was different. A new species had drawn their gaze in ways none had expected: humanity. At first, the human race had been dismissed as insignificant, a late arrival to the interstellar community, lacking both brilliance and spectacle. They had no mastery of higher technologies, no psychic gifts, no engineered perfection that so many other species possessed. To the Council's eyes, humans were little more than a footnote in history. Yet reports arriving in recent cycles began to shift that perspective. Battle logs and intercepted transmissions painted an unsettling pattern. Despite their supposed disadvantages, human forces were defeating adversaries who should have crushed them with ease. Engagement after engagement, the same improbable outcome repeated itself: humans victorious, even when outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. The Council debated in growing unease. How could a race with so little apparent strength dismantle powers older and far more advanced? One delegate suggested it was chance, nothing more than statistical flukes. That notion was quickly dismissed. Others pointed to something far more troubling: humanity's uncanny resilience and adaptability. Unlike most civilizations, humans did not rely on one singular edge, neither overwhelming technology, nor psychic prowess, nor genetic enhancements. Instead, they learned, adapted, and changed with startling speed. Every encounter that should have weakened them only sharpened their claws. They fought with brutal efficiency, treating war not as a ritualized affair of honor but as a hunt. They resisted, endured, and, most terrifying of all, they learned to turn an enemy's strength against them. The initial arrogance of the Council, the belief that humans were a temporary nuisance soon to be corrected, was eroding with each human victory. More members began to see the truth. Humanity was not simply another species to be contained. It was a force rising from the shadows, capable of disrupting the fragile balance of the galaxy itself. The chamber filled with heated voices. Some demanded swift action, even a preemptive strike, to strangle the threat before it matured. Others urged caution, warning that branding humanity as an enemy would only provoke them further. One proposed a chilling classification: apex predators. But the more arrogant delegates scoffed at the idea, refusing to accept that such a young and unrefined race could possibly endanger empires that had reigned unchallenged for thousands of years. Still, a few voices rose above the noise. Observers who had studied humans closely spoke with grave concern. They warned that this species carried a predator's nature unlike any encountered before. It wasn't merely their adaptability that terrified them, it was the unyielding drive to endure, to fight back, and to win, no matter the cost. Even in hopeless scenarios, humanity always found a way to flip the board, to strike back with calculated precision. That, they argued, was the true mark of a top predator. Silence eventually fell across the Council chamber as the weight of those warnings pressed into their collective thoughts. They had faced countless threats before: rebellions, plagues, rogue empires, but never anything quite like this. The rise of humanity was not fueled by superior science or engineered evolution. It was driven by something far older, far more primal: a will to survive, adapt, and dominate. By the meeting's end, the majority of the Celestial Council chose arrogance over caution. They convinced themselves that humanity could be subdued with one decisive strike. They deployed hunter detachments, elite strike teams formed from the finest warriors of multiple civilizations, trained to eliminate threats with surgical precision. These units had never failed. They had crushed insurgencies, put down rebellions, and eradicated dangerous rogue species. To them, humanity would be no different. Their orders were simple: target and neutralize critical human outposts and colonies. The campaign was expected to be swift, clean, and merciless. But from the very first contact, something was wrong. The humans did not scatter like frightened prey. They did not panic. Instead, they counterattacked, not with overwhelming firepower or superior weapons, but with something far deadlier: strategy, deception, and cunning. The hunter teams, armed with cutting-edge weapons and centuries of experience, found themselves ensnared in traps, ambushed with guerrilla tactics, and manipulated through terrain they thought they controlled. One by one, their confidence began to unravel. Humans refused direct confrontation unless it was to their advantage. Instead, they studied their attackers, learning with terrifying speed how they moved, how they fought, how their technology operated, and then exploited every weakness with surgical precision. For the first time in their storied existence, the hunters became the hunted. Disturbing reports soon flooded back to the council. First one squad lost contact, then another. Before long, nearly half of the elite strike teams had gone silent, destroyed or presumed dead. This was not supposed to happen. The council had expected swift victories, yet their finest warriors were falling to the very species they had labeled inferior. What unsettled the council most was not merely the mounting losses, but how humanity was winning. They were not only surviving, they were evolving with each encounter. Every battle honed their tactics, every skirmish made them more lethal. And worse still, they were beginning to fight a new kind of war, psychological. The humans weren't just fighting to defend their colonies. They were fighting to send a message. The hunters soon found themselves mocked at every turn. The humans left signs, subtle yet chilling, that every move was being watched, every action anticipated. Once feared across the stars, the council's elite squads now operated under a constant cloud of paranoia, never knowing when or where the next strike would fall. In one particularly brutal encounter, a team of hunters was lured into what appeared to be an abandoned human settlement. Empty streets, silent buildings, it looked deserted. But the stillness was a trap. As the squad advanced, explosive mines detonated beneath their feet. Structures collapsed in controlled demolitions. Improvised bombs ripped through the alleys. The hunters, seasoned veterans of countless campaigns, were unprepared for warfare like this. When the smoke cleared, the entire unit had been annihilated, not by overwhelming firepower, but by humanity's terrifying ability to turn their environment itself into a weapon. The council could no longer deny the truth. Humanity was not simply surviving. Humanity was winning. The hunters had underestimated their quarry, and now they were paying the price. What the council had failed to grasp was that humans thrived under pressure. They didn't rely solely on brute strength or advanced tools. They adapted, transformed weakness into advantage, and struck when their enemies least expected it. Reluctant to admit their blunder, the council tried to regroup. They deployed fresh hunter teams, this time armed with intelligence on human tactics. But it made little difference. Every squad sent into human-controlled territory walked into a nightmare. Guerrilla warfare, deception, and relentless psychological attacks wore them down long before a real battle even began. It was never about matching the council's technology. It was about outsmarting them, maneuvering them, making every move count. The once proud hunters were forced into retreat. What had been planned as a swift and decisive campaign devolved into disaster. Humanity had flipped the script, turning the hunters into prey, cutting them down one squad at a time with surgical precision. Warriors once celebrated as the most feared in the galaxy were now fleeing in terror from a species they had mocked as primitive and weak. As losses mounted, the council was confronted with a grim reality. Humans were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They weren't bound by the same rules of honor or ritualized combat that governed other civilizations. They fought to win, ruthlessly, efficiently, and without mercy. Every battle proved it more clearly. The true predators of this conflict were not the hunters but humanity. The final blow to the council's arrogance came when one battered squad managed to transmit a last message before being wiped out. It was not a request for reinforcements. It was not a detailed report of human numbers. It was a warning, a desperate plea for the council to stop underestimating this enemy. The squad leader, bloodied and fading, spoke a single chilling line: "They're not what we thought. They're hunting us." The message rippled like a shockwave through the council chambers. What had begun as a mission of domination had become a war for survival. The council had awakened something they neither understood nor controlled. Humanity was no longer a curiosity. Humanity was a threat, deadly and undeniable. The council had set out to hunt the humans. Now, it was humanity tightening the noose, ready to strike with the same ruthless efficiency that had already sealed the fate of the hunters. In the aftermath of their disastrous failure, the Council had no choice but to escalate. They assembled the largest invasion force in their history, a grand fleet meant to drown humanity in overwhelming firepower and sheer numbers. This time, they believed there would be no chance for resistance. The plan was simple: crush Earth and the human colonies beneath a storm of advanced weaponry before the upstarts could retaliate further. But once again, they miscalculated. When the invasion armada arrived in Earth's orbit and across human-controlled territories, they expected swift surrender. Their technology was superior, their warships unmatched. What they found instead was a war of attrition unlike anything they had ever faced. Humanity refused to fight on the Council's terms. There were no grand battles in the void, no traditional clashes between fleets. Instead, the war was dragged into the shadows, into hostile environments that humans knew far better than their invaders. Guerrilla strikes, sabotage missions, precision ambushes, these became the human signature. The Council had assumed their enemies would crumble before the sheer weight of their fleets. Instead, humans used that arrogance against them, drawing the invaders into prolonged engagements, bleeding their resources and grinding down their morale. Cities became fortresses, not in the traditional sense, but through hit-and-run attacks that left Council soldiers exhausted and demoralized. One of the Council's greatest mistakes was believing that humans would fight like any other species, conventionally, predictably. But humanity had abandoned those rules long ago. Every advantage, no matter how small, was weaponized. Supply lines were severed, equipment was sabotaged, terrain was exploited. Council troops lived in constant tension, never knowing when or where the next strike would fall. What disturbed them most was humanity's resilience. Despite overwhelming odds, human forces did not shatter. They hardened. With each battle, they grew more determined. They lacked the Council's advanced technology, but they did not need it. What they lacked in equipment, they made up for in ingenuity and relentless adaptability. Human soldiers scavenged alien systems, hijacked enemy communications, and even turned wreckage from destroyed warships into weapons and defenses no strategist had foreseen. In one particularly shocking case, a small group of human engineers captured a damaged shield generator. Within days, they had reverse-engineered it and produced smaller versions, outfitting improvised bases with defenses strong enough to withstand bombardments from Council fleets. The sheer speed of this innovation stunned the enemy. They had never encountered an adversary capable of learning and evolving so rapidly. And the war was no longer fought with weapons alone. Humanity's psychological warfare cut just as deep. Propaganda swept across the stars. Images of human victories, stories of soldiers who could appear and vanish like ghosts, and rumors of impossible feats spread among the Council's troops. These broadcasts inspired humanity's own people and broke the morale of their enemies. Fear became a weapon, wielded as effectively as any rifle. As the campaign dragged on, cracks began to show. Council soldiers, trained for direct combat, found themselves unable to cope with an enemy that fought on every level, physical, mental, and strategic. Every time the Council believed they had found a countermeasure, humanity unveiled something new, unexpected, and devastating. The once proud armies began to falter. Exhaustion gnawed at their discipline. Overconfidence gave way to mistakes. Forces stretched too thin, stumbling into traps born of desperation and genius combined. Each error only fed humanity's relentless advance. For humanity, this was not just another war. It was a trial of endurance. And endurance was their domain. Unlike the comfortable civilizations of the Council, humans had spent their entire history clawing for survival. To them, this war was not a burden, it was tradition. And they would see it through, no matter the cost. This was no longer about defeating the invaders. It was about sending a message. Humanity was not prey, and they would never be prey again. Every victory, every act of defiance, was more than just resistance. It was a declaration that humanity had become the true predator in this war. Battle after battle, they proved they could withstand anything the Council hurled at them, and they had no fear of fighting dirty if that meant survival and triumph. As the Council's forces wavered, humanity launched a coordinated wave of strikes against critical installations, crippling their ability to sustain the invasion. Entire fleets were stranded as human sabotage teams destroyed fuel depots and communication relays. Once proud warships of the Council, symbols of galactic dominance, suddenly found themselves vulnerable, picked apart by human assault teams that attacked with surgical precision. The Council had believed sheer numbers could crush humanity, but they had not accounted for the relentless will of their enemy. And now they were learning, far too late, that humanity did not fight merely to endure. Humanity fought to win, no matter how long it took. What was meant to be the Council's grand invasion had devolved into a costly disaster with no end in sight. Even the most arrogant counselors could no longer deny the truth. This species could not be conquered. The so-called prey had become the ultimate predator. Every move the Council made only steeled humanity's resolve. With each faltering battle, the humans not only endured, they advanced. The Council had lost control of the war, and they knew it. What had begun as a confident effort to erase a potential threat had now collapsed into a fight for the Council's own survival. Humanity showed no signs of retreating. The bitter realization settled in at last. This war would never end in victory for the Council. Humanity had seized the role of predator and was prepared to carry it through to the final strike. The Galactic Council was cornered, its forces scattered, its supplies exhausted, and its morale shattered. A species once dismissed as a minor nuisance had transformed into the greatest danger the Council had ever faced. The humans now pressed their advantage. Their final campaign was not about occupying new territories but about dismantling the Council's very foundation piece by piece. Communication networks, supply depots, and key defense systems were systematically destroyed, plunging the once dominant empire into chaos. Council members, once so certain of their superiority, fractured under the pressure. Some clung to the delusion that victory was still possible if they committed more resources. Others, more realistic, recognized the truth: they had already lost. Human forces waged not just a military war, but a psychological one. Council soldiers grew paranoid, second-guessing every move, while their leaders splintered under the relentless strain. In desperation, the Council attempted negotiations, offering peace, concessions, anything to halt the destruction. But humanity no longer cared for diplomacy. The betrayal of the initial invasion had sealed the Council's fate. To the humans, this war had become deeply personal, a fight for survival and vengeance. They knew any treaty would only grant their enemies time to recover and strike again. Humanity had no intention of giving them that chance. When the final human assault descended upon the Council's core worlds, it was clear this was not a struggle for dominance. It was the end. The Council fleets were weakened, their soldiers scattered, their defenses in disarray. Human strike teams dismantled the last resistance with ruthless efficiency. There was no doubt left. Humanity had mastered this war, and the title of predator was now theirs alone. The Council's ruling world, once believed untouchable, became the final target. The human fleet did not arrive in overwhelming numbers, but in a carefully calculated force. They did not need to occupy the planet. They came to erase the last vestiges of the Council's power. The once proud capital city, symbol of dominance for centuries, was reduced to rubble in hours. The once revered leaders of the Council were reduced to fugitives, hiding in the ruins of their own arrogance. Humanity's point had been made. They had stood against the most powerful governing body in the galaxy, and they had emerged victorious. But it was not just the Council that had been defeated. The entire galaxy had witnessed its downfall, toppled by a species once ridiculed as primitive and insignificant. Humanity had proven beyond all doubt that they were not to be underestimated. They had proven that survival, adaptability, and the will to fight mattered more than technology or tradition. The captured Council leaders were dragged before a human tribunal. Once feared across the stars, they now stood broken, pleading for mercy, offering anything to avoid the consequences of their actions. But humanity had no interest in forgiveness. The invasion that had nearly exterminated them could not be forgotten nor forgiven. This was not just revenge. It was a safeguard for the future. The humans would ensure no one ever dared to challenge them again. The human commander stood before the court and delivered a message that echoed across the galaxy. Humanity was never prey in this war, not for a single moment. When the Council chose to attack us, they awakened something far more dangerous than they imagined. We are not bound by the rules that govern your empires. We were forged in the fire of survival, and that has made us the apex predators. The trial was swift. The Council leaders were condemned for their crimes against humanity. Yet the true judgment had already been rendered. The council as a governing body was dead. Its fleets lay in ruins, its armies scattered, its worlds vulnerable to chaos. Humanity had not only defeated them, they had dismantled them, root and branch. With the fall of the Galactic Council, humanity assumed a new role. No longer were they an upstart race struggling to find their place. They were now one of the most feared and respected powers in the galaxy. Their ability to adapt, to endure, and to triumph had earned them a seat at the top. But this was not about conquest. It was about survival. Humanity had fought not for expansion, but for the right to exist. And in doing so, they had proven, beyond any doubt, that they were the supreme predators of the galaxy, the apex of survival itself. As the Council's shattered worlds fell into chaos, humanity stood as a symbol of resilience and strength. They had not merely survived, they had thrived, and now, with the galaxy watching, they made their stance clear. Never again would they be underestimated. Those who once doubted them, those who sought to dominate them, had learned the hardest truth of all. Humanity was never prey, humanity were the hunters, and any who dared stand in their way would meet the same fate as the fallen council. The galaxy would never be the same. The balance of power had shifted forever, and at the very center of it stood humanity, adaptable, unyielding, and victorious.